we can only do our best work for those that are aligned with what we believe and that our tastes are similar, our ambition, our desire for innovative thinking and design, and willingness to take some risk, not a lot of risk, but some risk at least. So if we're aligned with those people, we have to say like, well, who are those people? Who do I want to represent? And who am I a good representative for? And I think that's the other challenge that we have to get over, because it's unfortunately, we're trapped under the scarcity mindset. Like, oh, I don't know when the next gig is going to come, so I better just say yes. And I don't want to pick a lane, because picking a lane means other kinds of clients aren't right for me. And it's actually the opposite is true, where the more specialized we become, the more focused in what it is that we're able to do.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? Today's guest has spent the last decade rewriting the rulebook for education in the 21st century. He's an award-winning designer on a mission to help other creatives build businesses and business leaders build better brands. He's a loud introvert, recovering graphic designer, educator, and host of the Futur YouTube and Futur podcasts. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Do. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Doing excellent. Thank you very much.
For those who may have never heard of you, which I think is very unlikely, could you briefly introduce yourself for me, please?
Absolutely. My name is Chris Do. I'm a loud introvert, and I'm the founder of The Futur, a company I started in 2014 after spending over 2 decades making commercials and music videos for a living. And it's the richest, most rewarding, soulful, meaningful work I've ever done in my life.
I'm fascinated by the music videos and all that stuff, but I want to go somewhere to the beginning. And my question is, do you know what you and Johnny Cupcakes have in common? There's one thing that you and Johnny Cupcakes have in common.
Aside from him being on our podcast?
And it's not making apparel. It's not making your own apparel.
No, I don't know what it is.
Okay, so I've seen Johnny Cupcakes speak maybe 10 years ago. And I believe, just like him, just like yourself, he was selling sweets in a playground on a schoolyard. Is that right? Have I got that information about you right?
Yes. Yeah. In junior high. Yeah.
Junior high. So I believe Johnny Cupcakes, if I remember it right from that talk, that's what he did. And I'm thinking, how do you get supplies to be selling sweets? and what's the margins? Let's talk about margins too.
Yeah. So you have to remember this is like mid to late 80s here. So Costco wasn't a thing just yet, or maybe it was beginning. But my uncle owned a liquor store, and part of the liquor store is he has to stock different kinds of chips and soda and candy, and he had the best assortment of candy. Every time we'd go and see him, he's like, get whatever you want. It's like pretty exotic stuff that you don't see in the normal supermarkets. And my cousin would sometimes work at the liquor store, helping his dad out. So one day I get this idea that I want to sell candy and I want to buy the cool stuff, not the stuff you can get at the cafeteria. And so I said, hey, put in an order for me. He gave me a list, like a checklist of things that he could get. And I bought it from him wholesale, and I just turned around and sold it.
Incredible. Good margins? Did you make money?
Very good margins. Yeah, relatively speaking, yeah. It's like 50% margins.
Wow. So if you call yourself an introvert, or you should consider yourself an introvert for most of your sort of adolescent life, how do you come out of your shelf just to do that? Like, how do you get that entrepreneurial spirit? Look, I'm going, good candy is a good candy. The sugar rush is there. But how do you break that barrier right from the start?
I think you have to be more motivated than your fear. So my motivation is to have some money to buy a skateboard or something else, or maybe it was a Swatch watch or something. We're middle class or maybe upper middle class, but my parents always made us feel like we were poor. I'm like, we have no money. I'm going to just go get things on my own. I always felt really bad about asking my mom and data for stuff. So I'm like, I'm going to make some money. So I thought, okay, I don't want to talk to people. I really don't. This is very uncomfortable for me, but I like this idea of being able to be more autonomous and to generate my own income more than the fear of meeting and talking to people.
I think that pretty much summarizes what we do for a living now, right? You don't necessarily want to talk to people, but you have to talk to people because you like the idea of the outcome. I think that's what we do. And I think that's why we get into this industry, because sometimes the fear just shouldn't stand in the way. So you and I have met in Toronto at the IGD Design Thinkers, which I think is a fantastic conference. And obviously I had the pleasure of talking to you on your podcast, and it's just my pleasure to have you back to turn the microphone the other way and ask you questions. And your talk, I realized I'm looking at my slides. I had quite a few pictures from your talk, and it was the first talk of the day. And you weren't big on this talk about sales. And I'm thinking, sometimes people want creative stuff. They want to be told like there's this sort of ephemeral sort of creativity that you can one day achieve. And you're like, no, we're going to sell. And look, we've made this much money. We did this, we did that. And I want to follow up on a conversation we had about creativity for sale, because is it sale of creativity? What do we do these days?
You know what? I think there are a lot of really talented designers and artists out there who are struggling to make ends meet, to get the opportunities, because they haven't learned the other aspect of it. There's something that I heard a very famous comic book artist. His name is Todd McFarlane. He was being interviewed from Complex magazine. He said, the reason why I'm successful in doing what I'm doing is because I learned to speak two languages. I learned to speak the language of art and design, and then I learned to speak the language of business. And it's very important for us to be bilingual. And I don't think it's a thing that is disputed. It's an undisputed thing that Todd McFarlane is the most successful, financially speaking, comic book artist of all time. He owns toy companies. He owns lots of merchandising and licensing companies. And he also has one of the longest running comic book series from Image Comics. So there's something about this that we need to understand how to speak the language of business. Those are the people who make the decisions to hire us, to give us not only their trust, but their money, and to put the fate of whatever business enterprise they have in our hands. And it's a big responsibility. And sadly, I would say it's a very broad brushstroke statement that most of design education, formal design education, focuses on the art and craft, rightfully so, but neglects to speak about or teach business principles from the people who are actually done it themselves.
That's a good analogy about speaking two languages, because when you boil it down, we create commercial work. We create something that aids the economy per se. Like we're helping people succeed financially, business wise, and with the things that we create, obviously it's for that. But I'm sure from experience through the Future that lots of people don't want to get involved with the business. They'll feel like that they're artists. Whereas I'm sure if you were to speak to Damien Hirst or whoever, Jeff Koons, they are shrewd businessmen. They don't create the work themselves. They got teams of people doing the stuff. And I think they are not only bilingual, but trilingual. They know how to do production and do everything else. And I think as we grow, would you agree that we accept these things more? Because as novices, I feel like we want to change the world from our perspective rather than having the world change around us with us. Would you agree? Because we got this naivety that we know everything.
I think there is. And I think it's because this idea that's been put in our head from our instructors and professors. Now, what we need to understand is, with exception, most art education is taught by lifelong academics, not practitioners in the field who are still active and relevant. So they're teaching you this idealism, which is great, especially as you're a young 18, 19-year-old and you think, I'm going to change the world in my image, and it's going to be crafted around my perception of reality and the unique lens in which I look into the world. And then you got into the real world and it's a little bit different. It's not so protected. And it's okay to be saying these kinds of message within a very, like an ivory tower of like academia, which they don't have to worry about because they're tenure. They have grants sometimes, and they work on soulful art projects that aren't commercially viable. And so they're teaching these principles to artists and designers to go out into the world and say, like, you don't have to do that. But I find that the people who understand commerce and who makes our lifestyle possible, then we kind of have to meet them at least halfway. I say meet them all the way, but at least halfway. And it seems reasonable. And so there's this unrealistic expectation that you can get out of design school and just be the sought after designer and make a good living doing it while not learning business or compromising at all.
I think, would you say, as 21st century creatives, we have to be different to 20th century creatives? I happen to live just across the road from someone called John Pash, who designed the Rolling Stones Lips logo. Our postman told me once, he was like, I've only lived this house for about 6 months. And he's like, do you know the guy lives over there? And I started looking into his story because obviously we all know the Lips, we don't know the man. And so I've been looking at the story, and I've also met lots of creatives in London where they were sort of more old school. They were old creatives who didn't rely on any internet. There was no such thing. It was such a different way of making business. And maybe their lives were slightly different because they didn't have the extra noise in their lives and extra comparison, obviously, flying around us all the time. So I'm always fascinated, like, how much was it for them easier? Was it not? Because in our lifetime right now in the 21st century, like, we have to do lots of different things. And sometimes people say, you know what? DJ in the 90s was a DJ and that's all he did. They had all the other people doing stuff. Whereas now you're a DJ, you're a social media manager, you're a content creator. And sometimes I think about it like, isn't that amazing that we can do this? Because we can actually learn how the world operates, how we can apply, actually how we can appeal to people. Because what people see as a hindrance or extra burden is actually, you know what? It's in your hands. You can do it, right?
Yeah, I think so, but it depends on how you look at it. Are you a glass half full or half empty person? I think in the 80s, there was this golden, or maybe 70s and 80s, there was this golden era where the highest level of designer were flown in by helicopter to meet with CEOs and corporations, design multi six-figure projects. And there was this love and respect for the art and craft of identity design as it's practiced on the highest level. People like Saul Bass, people like Milton Glaser and Paul Rand. Some of the European designers who came to America did some really amazing big things. I don't know what happened along the way with proliferation of desktop design and publishing and the growing needs and challenges of what an identity standards looks like these days. It seems like the market is flooded with creatives, and kind of we do this to ourselves. We say, I'll do that for cheaper than Johnny. I'll do that. And then what happens is it starts to erode the level of sophistication with entrepreneurs changes. And so now we have this wide open marketplace that is both good and bad. There's good and there's evil in it. I'll say that. I don't want to be solely like this optimistic Pollyannic person and looking at it like that. But I like to look at all these challenges as potential opportunity. The opportunity is always hidden inside the package of obstacles. And if you dig deep enough, you'll find something cool. I think what's really interesting in these times is, as a multifaceted communication design person, you have direct access to the consumer, to a fan base, and it costs you nothing to do. It costs you nothing. Now, I remember as a motion design firm, the way that we would get visibility for our work is to sponsor or to pay for our work to be included in workbooks or on special DVD reels or advertorial things that were part of the trades. And we would have to pay thousands of dollars to get access to us. And I would do begrudgingly. I say that because it wasn't trackable. It was kind of dubious as to whether or not it was going to produce any real result, but it felt like we had to do it to belong to a fraternity of designers who were taken seriously. I'm sure you're of that age and era too, where there were black books filled with like photographers and illustrators and designers. And I still have some of those things. And those things were printed in thousands and distributed to art directors, art buyers, and designers who were in a position to hire us. And we're hoping that in that 300-page book, they flip and find our one page and actually look at it and decide to remember it. And even a longer shot is to call us for it. That was bananas. And so today we are somewhat spoiled that we have direct access that doesn't cost us anything. What it does require us now is to make stuff and to be much more intentional about how we want to be seen in the world. What is our lens? What is our voice? And if we play the game and we create value for people and we show up consistently enough, it will pay off.
I'm nodding here profusely. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I like your analogy about, I hope they open a page where we are on that page, because I used to be featured and I used to pay for a page, which was literally thousands of pounds in an illustration book, not that long ago, 10 years ago, maybe. And used to be shipped. It was a surface shipped in a USA post bag, which was literally like a full sack. The book weighed God knows how many kilos. It was incredible, but it didn't, as you said, like you were hoping that someone would find you and it was not trackable. And when you think about it, that, that experience, it cost you maybe less, but you're still hoping that someone will flip the book open. Let's call it internet now. Someone will flip the social media and find you somewhere. And I think having the ratio, it's cheaper, it's easy to be online, but you still have to do extraordinary work to actually stand out in that big noise. Because if it was 300 pages you were fighting, now you're fighting what now in the, let's call it competition with 3, 4, 5 million people, and everyone's got the same shape of the social media or same shape of a website, which we've got the same screen to project our work against it. But I guess there's more people. I think there's more chances to do more work because we got more founders, startups, more companies, more bigger budgets, bigger awareness, more multifaceted and fragmented marketing that we've got frames and medias that we never had before. But that, I think, does it or not? When you think about it, does it shrink the budget like what we had and that attention? Because the place to go to find someone is other. We used to be, in my lifetime, it was in 2005, it was a website. That website was the only place to be. Whereas now people want to listen to our podcast. Some want it on YouTube, some want it on Apple Podcasts, some want it on Spotify, someone wants it somewhere else, someone wants it, download it. Someone wants to read a book as an audiobook, someone wants to as a paperback, someone wants to sign. And you're like, we're tailoring to all of these personal preferences. But sometimes you're like, can we simplify this? Wouldn't that be still possible? Which it might not be. So with the focus on sales these days, when you think about how we try to be seen and do work with clients, from your experience, do people have the right mindset about getting new clients? Do they think, is it creativity first and money second, or is money first? Because with the arrival and advent of social media and YouTube, we seem to have this figure of $10,000 bounded around as a sort of the baseline. Does it bamboozle people before they can actually, does it make them want to run before they can walk?
Oh, this is a question that opens up a lot more questions, I think. So let me try and see if I can unpack some of the things that might be loaded within this question. Deceptively simple question, a great question though. First is this idea of mindset. If I were to grab 100 designers off the streets of Los Angeles, just randomly pick, I'm just not sure how many of them think that marketing what they do is an important part of their work. That I think the vast majority, I would say 80% of them, 80 out of 100 would say, I just do good work. That's how I get work. And they're relying mostly on word of mouth advertising, referrals, and passive ways of people finding out about them. They do enough business to survive, but not necessarily thrive. And they look at the burden, marketing as a burden that they're like, ugh, I can't be bothered by. And what they do is they see people who have fairly decent traction, whether it's a podcast or Instagram account or a LinkedIn account, those designers as being shills or somehow not real designers because they're playing the marketing game. They don't understand the importance of it. So let's put those people aside. If we have 20 people left now, the ones who are actively participating in the act of generating leads for their business and doing thought leadership, whether you write a book or podcast or something else, then those people, I think, have the right mindset to begin with. And now they're going to get frustrated. Like, I'm doing the work, but I'm not getting the results. What am I doing wrong? Am I shadow banned? Because that's the default. I'm so important that I'm causing a stir that people are shadow banning me. No, I don't think so. I think most of the times it's because you don't understand how to write content for people to consume on the platforms in which you hope that they will consume them on. So now that would leave with us, like, of the 20, maybe 2 or 3 people who are embracing marketing, understand how to communicate, how to build thought leadership, how to connect with an audience. Then I think now the next part is they need to figure out, what is the point of doing all this stuff? Is it to generate more leads, to make more money, or just to have more work than you could know what to do with? And this is a fork in the road here, the proverbial fork. And so you come to the fork, and the fork says, go to the left, do as much work as possible, strike while the iron's hot. While the other person says, or the other road says, you know what, do high quality work for a select number of people at the highest price in which you can charge so that you can focus on those people. So it's 2 totally different mindsets. One is a volume, like I just want to grab as many clients as I can, because if I'm prolific, that's the way to get to progress. And the other person is, I want to be super selective and I'm okay that there could be long periods of drought, but when I feast, it's worthwhile. And so that we're kind of divided in those two camps. I can't tell you of those three people that are left, which road did they pick. I just have a feeling as to which road they pick.
Yeah, it's a actually very accurate answer. I think I read somewhere today that out of 260 million active users on LinkedIn, only 1% write content. So that's 2.6 million people out of a billion. So that's basically the decimal number of the users. But when you mentioned that, I think the word was like get more clients. And I think that just seems to be something in your message you have, and we'll talk about and about the future in a minute. But it seems to be like we need more, like get more clients. Because, for example, the first group of people you mentioned, they do word of mouth, they survive, they don't thrive. But sometimes they would like more clients, but then they don't necessarily need them, because how many clients do you need? Do you need to grow your team, or are you happy to wake up at 10 o'clock at night and work for 2 hours? Like, I think that's just sometimes it's a personal preference. But the messaging, again, and I think I want to process what's kind of out there is more clients. Do we need more clients, or do we think like Bezos of starting and growing someone small? Like, obviously they've got a model of selling someone a book and having them as a Amazon customer, and then selling them a TV or whatever of high value? Or do we need to think like a construction engineer? Do you just build one house and you move on because that your work is done? That builder doesn't need more clients. Whereas Amazon, do you need more clients? Like, how do you build it? What is the right medium? Does it, again, is it a question of mindset? Is it a question of business? How do you see it?
Well, if I were sitting in front of a small group of people who are creative and understand that they've mastered the fundamentals of design and they could apply it to web, to print, to some other format, okay, what should we do? We should say, like, together, that it's best for us to be extremely selective about who we work with, because we can only do our best work for those that are aligned with what we believe and that our tastes are similar, our ambition, our desire for innovative thinking and design, and willingness to take some risk, not a lot of risk, but some risk at least. So if we're aligned with those people, we have to say, like, well, who are those people? Who do I want to represent? And who am I a good representative for? And I think that's the other challenge that we have to get over, because it's, unfortunately, we're trapped under the scarcity mindset. Like, oh, I don't know when the next gig is going to come, so I better just say yes. And I don't want to pick a lane, because picking a lane means other kinds of clients aren't right for me. And it's actually the opposite is true, where the more specialized we become, the more focused in what it is that we're able to do. First of all, the easier it is for us to do what we do, because we've seen it many times before. So we're going to develop a reputation for one who's an expert at solving a certain kind of problem. So when you become that kind of person, you're able to transition away from being one of many to one of one. And I think that's the status we all would like to be at, whether you're Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons or Joe Schmo at a design shop. You want to be seen and sought after as, if you want X, whatever, fill in the blank, done, then you must go to this person. Everyone else is going to be a compromise. And that's a bold idea to embrace and say, yes, that's who I want to be, and that's how I want to be perceived. Great. I'm going to plant my flag in the ground and say, this is what I stand for. So any prospect that's interested in having this kind of conversation, I'd like to do this with you. And then it takes the work of putting out consistent pieces of thought leadership, usually things that you write, observations you've had, frameworks you've designed, any kinds of data or the things that people in your market would find valuable. And if you could do that work, then you're going to attract the right kinds of customers. And that's the thing I would have to tell people. Let's specialize. Let's claim an area of focus. Let's be extremely selective with who we work with. And because we don't work with a lot of people, we then therefore have to charge a certain amount of money, but to give us the kind of time and the resources to hire people, to be able to do the right kinds of research and prototype and do testing. And so we're not rushing through just to get the project done. And unfortunately, I see the vast majority of creatives that are working, whether they're in the US, Europe, or other markets, are always seemingly behind or under the gun to, like, get the project delivered as fast as possible. I don't think that's not the recipe for doing high quality work.
How long did it take you to actually get to that mindset? How long did it take you to say, this is my flag in the ground? Because it takes time to grow. When I think about it, when you say like, no, the fewer clients and we can charge more, from experience, I've kind of decoded it the other day. It's like you say yes to everything you can learn from. And then once you've learned, you say no so you can grow. So you get space to grow. So I've had conversations with up and coming designers and they said, well, I haven't worked on anything I haven't liked yet. Obviously now we've got the messages amplified through internet. And okay, you can work with anyone and you can be anything if you double down on who you are. But it always fascinates me that people say, I don't want to work with everyone. I don't want to try everything. Because I think with the niching and specializing, sometimes you never know when you might find yourself be actually interested. So how long did it take you to find that?
It didn't take that long, but I'll tell you something that I think I have this combination of both ignorance and arrogance. Ignorance, like I didn't know that was not a thing that you can do, and arrogance in the belief that if I set my mind to something, of course it's going to happen. But we can get caught into two cycles, and it's very important to point this out in case you identify that you're in one of two cycles. I'll present the darker of the two. It's the vicious cycle, which is I don't know if I'm worth what it is I'm going to charge, so I don't charge enough. And then therefore I keep having to chase every single opportunity. So I'm saying yes to everything. And the clients don't see the connection from project to project. I'm seen as a broad generalist without a deep area of expertise. And so I get all the bids. I compete with everybody and I win very few. But the projects that I win don't bring in a lot of money. So I don't have that runway in order for me to say like, I need to be selective for a little bit. I'm always worrying about 1 month or 2 months worth of rent because that's all I've got to my name. I'm one financial disaster away from total ruin and bankruptcy. Let's talk about the virtuous cycle where for whatever reason, if you're able to just go out there in the market and just believe that you do something that's good and it's real and you can give it to someone who also sees it in you, then you make a little bit more money than you think you should. And then you have a little breathing space. So you're like, okay, I'm not so desperate and I feel pretty good. Somebody paid me more than I thought I was supposed to get. The next person comes and you're like, I wonder if I could just ask for a little bit more. And you do that and you keep doing that. And so eventually your runway goes from 1 month to 3 months and 6 months to 12 months. And you're like, I can't believe I made more money on this gig than I would have had an entire years of working for someone. And so now that puts you in a whole different place and a perspective. So you can sit back and say, what would be right for me now? Now that I've removed this immediate burden or desire that I have to pay the rent and keep the lights on, what should I be doing? For me, I was able to figure this out pretty quickly. And the story I tell people is when I was at Art Center, they would have like a bulletin board of job opportunities. And I was looking for some side money. And of course, they had the little things that you can tear off the flyer and that call this person. So I remember one was like freelance designer wanted $30 an hour. I'm like, that's pretty good money for a kid who's broke, just living off credit cards. So I'd tear it off and call and they'd look at my portfolio and say, okay, we'll give you some work. And I was busy doing bank brochures, trifold, gatefold bank brochures. I was like, did I really go to art school to go and work for banks? It's the most conservative, boring thing. I can't do anything that wouldn't feel inappropriate and self-indulgent. So quickly, I'm like, the money is okay. It's not great, but I don't want to do this. I'd rather starve. And it's that willingness to say, I'd rather starve and reduce all of my financial needs down to the bare minimum, mostly just rent. I'd eat at fast food places, not great for your health, but that's what I would do. And eventually another gig would come. Okay, now I'm going to charge them real money and you get to do this. So I was starting to say no pretty quickly. And then about a year into my business, I learned the next very important business lesson. And I was working on a main title for Eraser starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, it's still a big deal, right? We're talking about the mid 90s here. Arnold's still like a star. And the client who hired me to do this sent one of their senior animators over because they didn't trust if I knew how to do this. And thank God, because I really didn't know how to do it. I'm just a kid out of school. And then I watched this person work and he was showing me like little shortcuts and ways to make the animation better. And within a few hours, I'm like, gosh, that's what it's like to have some expertise, some knowledge about what you're doing. And then we delivered the project and I turned to my girlfriend, later on my wife. I said, I think we got to stop doing websites, logo design, entertainment flyers. We need to focus on this motion thing because I'm excited about this. I don't want to do anything else but this. And I feel like it's something I can sink my teeth into for the next 10, 20 years and still be excited about it learning something new every single day. And then at that point, we decided we're not doing any of this other work. We took it all off our website and just left one or two pieces and just relied on that in order for it to drive more work. It took a lot of faith and it took some financial runway to be able to make a bold decision like that. But I credit that with the thing that's a turning point for our service design company.
What you mentioned there is actually something I've been thinking about to ask you anyway, is that I feel that there's no shortcut to experience. There's a shortcut to knowledge. You can read all the books. As you say, like you can top up your knowledge that you're missing, or you can read the right books and you can do that. But there's no shortcut to experience. And I think sometimes actually, I would say that we get paid because we are more experienced. So you got your Paul Lachaise saying it took me 30 years to learn it and to draw it in 30 seconds. Sometimes like knowing all the shortcuts, what to click and what to press is what the experience is. And I had an experience working as a retoucher. I had a very multifaceted career. I mean, I have tried everything. I think that's why I ended up where I am today. But I remember working with retouchers and he looked through my screen and he was like, yeah, you need to take up some yellow out of your blue channel. And my mind was blown. I'm like, what do you mean? And by the way, I want to know how does he even know that? He's looking across the room. He's looking at I was working for a telephone company called O2, and they got predominantly blue visuals, which are terribly hard to print properly in CMYK. And he was like, yeah, you need to do this and that. I was like, that's incredible. Like he can see that. And it just blew my mind because I just wish that lots of people had that mindset of being curious. Like, how do I solve a problem with almost with your eyes closed? What is the equation? What is the problem? And I just feel like with the shortcut to experience, which doesn't exist, do you sometimes feel that in a world that wants you to succeed in a way, like we've got more courses, books and videos on how to do anything, but do you feel sometimes it's misleading for the people to actually think, you know what, that experience also needs to come. It comes with time. You can't just get it done straight away because you just watched a video on how to get more clients or how to do this. Do you think sometimes it's misunderstood from experience?
Possibly. Someone once said to me, you don't learn how to play basketball by reading a book. You learn how to play basketball by stepping on the court and just playing and having someone guide you through the process and then doing the work that is often not talked about, but this unceremonious drills, just doing drill after drill. I have a friend, his name is Lance. He's got a boy and Lance is a former professional college, European circuit basketball player. And of course, he wants his children to learn to love basketball. But one of the three boys wound up becoming very good at it. And even though he's undersized, he's an incredible, he can dribble, he can pass, he can shoot, he has all the moves. And it's incredible to see this. But what you don't see, what most people don't see is all the weekends spent doing drills with cones, just going back and forth, or just throwing a bunch of balls in the air and just all these things that aren't fun to look at and do. I believe 1 year under hyper-focused attention and rigor can be more than 10 years of like haphazard poking around. So it's not necessarily an indicator of time. It's the depth of the experience that you have and under what conditions. I'll give you an example. So when I was starting my company in 1995, motion graphics was not a term that had been invented yet. So that's how early in I am. And I remember working with a couple of the people in Hollywood. This is where I was based in Los Angeles. The rate of work and the hours that they work a day are insane, totally unsustainable. They're doing 12, 14-hour days every single day. And the running joke was, don't bother coming in on Sunday if you're not going to come in on Saturday. And if you worked 9 hours, the joke would be half day today, huh? So there was a rigor there and the kind of just a velocity that's just unmanageable. I wasn't quite sure how these older guys who were running the companies were able to do this. Later on, you find out some drugs were involved, but that's another story for another day. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my God. So in a matter of 3 or 4 months, I think I had replaced my entire student portfolio, which had been built up for over 4 years. I was embarrassed by it because this is now like on new levels of understanding design, and it really excited me. And so if you work with someone who's working at a very high pace, working on the most creative briefs, you can learn so much in that period of time, being next to them by doing the work yourself and seeing how they think, if they're generous enough to explain to you, or you learn it through kind of observation, but you can do it. Now, the second best thing is to take a course or to be in a class, either in person or virtually, but you're not going to get the same kind of friction. And I think it's that kind of friction and that pressure that makes for beautiful things.
I fully agree. I fully agree. I think that sort of incubation period where, and I will go back to education for a second, the incubation period when you come out of university where you've been taught to think, unless you go to a business degree, unless you go, that there is no such thing to teach you all of the stuff, because you have people come out of university and they're like, okay, they can't use Photoshop really well, or they can't think business really well. They can't thinking, what was the point of going to university? Why would you do this? Whereas I think I'm a big fan of education. My education was in business management. It was not in anything creative. Creativity came second because I was just fascinated, like, how do things operate? So to have the outcome, I think sometimes being eager to jump the gun and go, look, I can launch my business. I can do this because I can learn this from offline courses. I think it's just misleading because, as you just said, you never learn better as we're working with other people because they've been pressing those keys, those buttons, and moving things around the screen, let's say for 20 years, 30 years. And this is, I think, the most magical part. You almost have your, like a boot camp, like you see footballers play. For example, we call them footballers, you call them soccer players. So let's take David Beckham, right? He was kicking a free kick 10,000 times in his spare time. He was kicking, like no one knows that because you go as a young one, you go through academy, you go through development teams then you get to be on the pitch and we get to see that top of the iceberg. Okay, here's the footballer. He's ready. Whereas you don't see the years and decades of graft, blood and sweat and tears. Whereas I think we think that sometimes you can achieve that in university in 3 years, where you spend the first year drunk because you've finally left home. So I would be speaking to experience of UK students that you don't particularly focus, then you do a little bit of work and then someone's doing better than you. So you feel disheartened and think this was not worth the time. Well, you and I know that any failure is beneficial for your growth because you will learn from it. But it's that sort of that, it's almost like, how do we signpost it that it's not easy just to arrive and be amazing because you need that time and you need that opportunity to learn, even that just actually to absorb from other people, because that's how you learn. Because there is many different ways to use Photoshop and many different ways to use any software, but we overlap. We have the common ways of solving problems. And yet I think we're losing that.
I think it's kind of hard to say because there are so many great tutorials out there, and I see people from using Illustrator and Photoshop and other programs where they show you like a tool that you're not normally using, and they just show you like one way you're doing it. And okay, so here's an example. I grew up and got into design via Adobe Illustrator, and you draw part of it, and then you would use the mirror tool and you'd flip it over. And then I saw somebody showing this thing about how to set up your guide so that it automatically mirrors the other side for you. So you just draw half of it and you can evaluate it without having to flip it over. What a time saver that is. And so those are little things that are like little tips and tricks in the buttons that I think can be learned this way. I learned Photoshop on the job, self-taught. A guy sitting next to me in the studio, totally random. I was watching him paint three-dimensional letter forms, kind of like the way you would do it with an airbrush. And I was like, wow, how are you doing this? And he was so generous to say, oh, here. And so he showed me something that might have taken me months, if not a year, to figure out on my own. He showed it to me in 30 minutes or less. And I'm like, wow. So now I'm like painting in Photoshop in ways that I used to with an airbrush and Frisket film. And so to me, that was like, cool. And now we get to do this and sit over on someone's shoulder virtually while they show us how to do something. And there's some pretty cool tricks that people do that I'm like, wow, never even knew you could do that. And that's pretty cool. So I think if you start with this place of genuine curiosity of, I just want to be a geek about whatever it is I'm using and to like know how every single button works so that when I want to communicate an idea, I know the most efficient, effective, and convincing way of doing it. The old way was to literally read through the manual. And I had a friend who we sat down, kind of straight out of college. He's, can I read the manual? I'm like, huh? Usually I put the manual back in the box. I just try and poke around and figure it out. He literally sat there for a week and read it from cover to cover like it was some Playboy magazine or something. I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? But when he was done, he was so good. I'm like, how are you doing that? So his sense of rhythm and design was backed by his technical prowess, and he was able to do anything. And for a long time, for years, I was like, I didn't want to animate next to you because you embarrass me. I'd rather just hire you to do all this work. Is that okay? He's like, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
I'm a big believer in the quote, well, actually the book cover, book title from Paul Arden's. It says, "There's no how good you are, it's how good you want to be." So I was one of the geeks reading a Adobe Illustrator book back to back because I wanted to know what the shortcuts are like, because I was bored going up and going through the palettes and from the top up, not top up menu. Because when I was coming through the ranks, it was the noise of the keyboard indicated how good designer you were, because you can't sit with your hand in your pocket and poke around with your mouse or whack on, because you've got all of these option keys, all of the things to press. So you make a noise if you, I don't know how it really feels now, but if you make a racket, if you make a noise whilst you're working, that means, oh, he's doing something, unless you're pretending to work, But yeah, I think that's kind of like, I feel like our software, our hardware is our instrument. If you don't have to think about what you're doing, what you press it, then you can actually think about it. So I always use John Mayer as an example. He doesn't look at his fretboard. Or Jacob Collier. These guys, they feel it because they're still learning, they're still practicing, they're still trying to actually improve their crafts. Even though I think you at the very top of the tree, in fact, you've planted that tree and you're at the top of your own tree, and they're doing that. So I think throughout this conversation, I think what you mentioned quite a few times, which I will summarize, is actually that we brought down the baseline of the breakthrough so much from unattainable to very easy. Because what you described, like what took a person to show you 30 minutes to do, which would have taken you a lot longer, now that's a click of a button. That's AI enhanced buttons. That's something that anyone can do. So we can do much more wonderful things and much more interesting things that you would need to be a real professional to do it before. But with the sort of the rise of AI, I'm going to quote, I think, one of your favorite authors, which is Seth Godin, who said that if you average, you're going to be replaced by AI. Basically, if you average radiographer, if you average designer, if you average whatever, like, you're going to be replaced with AI. And I went to a conference for a place called Business Elite. It was just in the center of London just last week. And they had a guy called Piers Linney who did a wonderful talk on AI, which was a proper grown-up conversation about AI. It was like, it's here, it's staying here. In fact, it's not going anywhere. And it will be everywhere, and it's only as the worst AI is today. Tomorrow is going to be better. So I think we have to have a conversation about AI and creativity, because as soon as generative AI came up, all of a sudden we have the creators that picked up their ears. I'm like, AI is here, it's going to replace us. And sometimes you think, well, maybe it should. Because if creativity at that level is so easy, then we've got opportunity to do something different with it. What's your take on AI, and how do you see it from where you are?
I love Seth Godin, but I actually don't agree with him on this, that if you're average, you'll be replaced by AI. It's your unwillingness to adapt AI tools into your workflow that'll make you be somebody who's going to be replaced. And there's that famous text meme tweet that was going around is, you will not be replaced by AI. You will be replaced by someone who's using AI. I think that's really interesting, because I know several people in my community who, for one reason or another, aren't great at doing whatever their chosen profession is. And while using AI, they're able to supplement things. And I'll give you an example. There's two people I know in particular. There's a woman, her name is Sherry, and she's an artist, classically trained. But, to make a painting, it's going to take a really long time. But you know what she's really good at? She's kind of like a wordsmith. She's very good at writing and poetry. And so she's using Midjourney, as she calls an AI sorcerer or AI conjurer. And she's able to write prompts that give images that I'm like, I don't even know how you did that. What the heck did you just do? Because I think I'm pretty good, but she smokes me. So now, based on her art training and her propensity to use words and her ability to describe things very clearly, she's able to overcome other people who are pretty good at image making, or maybe even excellent. And she's able to compete with them now. It's kind of wild. So that's real interesting. I have another person who's partially blind, and his name is Matthew. And he's partially blind. He's a photographer, and he's partially deaf in one ear. So he's got a learning disability too. He's like ADHD or something. I don't know what's going on, but he's able to use Otter AI to listen to conversations as he's prompting in real time, because he's got this weird ability where he could listen to someone speak while managing AI in the background, while participating in the conversation at the same time. So a brain like that needs more things to do. Otherwise, they're just bored out of their mind. They can't focus. But give him 2 or 3 things to do, and he's doing them. So I'm trying to host a room, and Matthew's sending me call summaries and like what the person just said or what they meant to say. And he's just helping me to save a lot of time. So I'm like, this is pretty cool. So a person who has some physical, like partially blind, partially deaf, he's able to now use these tools to do some things that he could not have done before. And I think we haven't even tapped into this kind of neurodiverse group of people who are going to be able to use tools and give them a competitive advantage, not to be on par, but to be ahead of. So I'm excited for them. So there's all these people who are worried, and most of them haven't tried to even use AI, which is like wild to me.
I think it's usually the uninformed mass hysteria. And I think you get it with all sorts of things. And I mean, so many things have changed in our lives and changing into our lives of our ancestors. And everything new seemed like a sort of a fear, like a challenge to our status quo, which we so much longing for. Yet sometimes when it's here, we are surprised by it and threatened by it, which we don't need to be because we need to embrace it. So Chris, you've gone from doing all these wonderful pieces of work to become an educator. I know that you were teaching at university for a while and now you've got your own company. And how did you build? So it sounds like it's been about 10 years of the future. Why did you decide to stop being creative per se, because you call yourself a recovering graphic designer? How did your creative work run its own course? Because I feel like we don't have infinite supply of enthusiasm. I feel like sometimes we just move on to the next thing and do that. So how did you get on from that to actually start an educational thing?
Well, I think for a person like me, and I hope I don't come across the wrong way here, is that I'm a deep diver. I like go super hot on something, and then when I'm done and I move on to something else. So when I'm in school, I'm learning traditional graphic design because I think I'm going to design album covers and concert posters and things of that nature. And I pour myself into learning everything. I interned with my professor. I took every class that he was teaching, and I would literally sleep at school, spend all my time in the computer lab until they closed and kicked you out. And so I saw that I was advancing at a pretty rapid pace, and I was outclassing some of my fellow students here. So I was like, what am I going to do here? Because they're busy learning fundamentals of design. I'm already building 3D models and doing animation. And they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm bored. Guys, catch up. Let's go. Let's do something more interesting. So a year out of school, there's this motion design thing. And now I'm like, oh my God, this is great because I can learn about editorial, about directing, photography, cinematography, special effects, visual effects, writing, directing, cinematography, color correction, all these kinds of things I can learn. I'm going to be busy for a long time. And that ran its course too. For about 2 decades, that's what I did. I went from designing the most insignificant thing to a TV commercial to directing the entire commercial with no graphics in it at all. And so now I'm like, I'm bored. What's the next challenge here? I'm looking for my next thing to sink my teeth into. Throughout this whole time, I've been teaching design and problem solving at different local design universities, right? So I'm like private art schools. I'm like, great. Let me do that. And I was like, okay, that's running its course. What is the next challenge? I'm a kind of guy who needs a new challenge. Because for me, if you ask me to design a poster, I'm sure there are people who can design it better than me. Maybe a couple dozen people, but for the most part, I'm pretty confident I can design at least as well or better than the vast majority of people who call themselves a designer. And so what is the reward there for me? And if I free myself from the need to make money, which I was able to do, because of the kind of industry that we worked in, being smart about how we charge and being smart about not spending money unnecessarily, I'm already retired. Like I've been retired for 10 years. And so if I'm not challenged emotionally, conceptually, artistically, and I'm just going to listen to a client tell me what to do, what is the point of that life? Now I get to explore something much more meaningful to me, which is how to become the best teacher that I can be. Because I think before my identity of being a designer, I was a teacher first, but I didn't think that was a valid profession, being that I don't want to starve. I don't want to suffer. And so it took me a while to figure out this business model. And yeah, we've been doing it now exactly 10 years in a couple of months.
Congratulations. One word I'm taking from this answer is challenge. And I think this is how we are hardwired as we've got survival instinct. We need to be solving problems. And sometimes I feel like when I read about intermittent fasting, we need to be hungry. We need to actually, when you've bloated, when you're overloaded, you're not going to be exactly looking for the next challenge. So I think looking for something new, looking for those sort of new bits of dopamine and challenges, I think always makes a wonderful experience. When you were talking about the sort of the education and talking about your creative career, we haven't really talked about sales. Was the sales the challenge? Would you say that's what it was the next challenge?
I think it was Buddha who said this, like the avoidance of suffering is suffering itself. And so if we just understand that our lives are going to be filled with problems, we just hope to have higher quality problems. So the first problem you have is I want to start a business. I don't know how to start a business. Then you get business and you think, why am I only getting $30,000 gigs? What do I need to do to get to the next level? And you keep doing this and you keep doing this. And now the new problem is how do I manage a team? And now you have a team and it's like the culture of the company is really funky and I need to deal with that now because I didn't hire correctly. And so you keep evolving the kinds of problems and the challenges that you have. So you can't be in business if you don't know how to do sales for very long, or at least do it well or profitably. And so my biggest challenge at that time was like, how come we keep winning jobs that are under 200,000, but over 200 grand, we just can't win those jobs. And that's when my business coach really helped to unlock something. And he taught me a very valuable lesson. He says, you think you're playing in the major leagues, but you're a minor league player competing with the very best in the world. Because once the budget goes past a certain threshold, they could literally call anyone in the world from Europe, from Asia, from America, from Canada, South America, wherever. They can call anyone and have them pitch on this and bid on this job. So it's like the level of competition get incrementally harder, it got exponentially harder. And so let's try to figure out what you're not doing that's hurting you. And let's correct for some of those things. And so once he laid it out to me, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know because I worked for myself mostly. I didn't have someone to shadow and to learn from. So yeah, there's all these challenges.
So when you put yourself in within a public facing sort of position for your business, I'm sure we can agree that sometimes people are not necessarily into what you do. Some you get the people who are with you and people who are against you. And if it's okay, I just want to ask, how do you deal with the adversity sometimes? Because there are millions of people who love what you do. And sometimes we all find a dickhead in our life who doesn't like what we do. How do you deal with that?
I think if you're going to put yourself out there, you need to do some inner work. You need to learn to accept who you are, to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and to be totally comfortable in that. I think that when people say bother, it's just because some part of that still feels true to us. I would say this to somebody. Here's the test, right? Somebody's like, you don't know what you're doing about design and you're like really depressed and sad about it. And I said, do you believe that to be true? You don't really know what you're doing with design. And they're like, no, of course I know what I'm doing. I said, are you sure? Yeah. So here's the test. I'm going to call you a purple alien with 14 eyes. Does that offend you? No, not at all. Like not even a little bit, like in terms of how it irritates you from 0 to 100. What is it? They're like 0. So why is it that this other comment bothers you? Because some part of you actually thinks that you don't know what you're doing. And so that's where this becomes a problem. So what happens is for most people, they are still like children living in an adult suit, right? This body, this flesh bag that we live in and have a lot of unresolved childhood trauma. And we all need a lot more love. And we're super insecure about who we are, especially as creative. We're so sensitive. So we don't create things that have a point of view. We don't say anything because we're so afraid of the blowback. If you believe what you believe, then I would rather be around with fewer people who are comfortable accepting me, not necessarily agreeing with me. And rather than trying to chase a bunch of people who don't care about anything about what I do and are going to disagree with me whenever they feel like it. It's like the kid who sprinkles salt on slugs just to see them suffer. It's like, there are people out there like that. And if that's going to get under your skin, then I would say, let's do some inner work and to take small steps to expose a little bit more of yourself. And through that exposure therapy, if you will, you become desensitized to it. So for me, there are a lot of critics out there. All you have to do is read any comment on our YouTube channel and you're like, God, they hate me. Like, but I'm good with it. It's par for the course. You can't have a critical thought if you're not willing to risk alienating or offending someone. I don't go out to try to be offensive, but sometimes people are like triggered by the strangest little things. Even when I say you're worth it, you should charge more. Oh, so you're out there peddling this self-help crap, aren't you? You fake guru, you. I'm like, okay, well, go kill yourself then. I don't know what to say. If I'm saying something positive and they're still having a negative reaction to it, but what can I do?
Chris, I think this is a fantastic way to park this conversation because, as you know from our first part on your channel, the negative part is not about a person. It's about who says the comments, especially it's about the person who says the stuff. Thank you very much for this, because I think you summarized it really well, because it's actually what's come from inside us, what's the inner work that helps us to actually grow and be somebody different. So thank you for making the time. Good to see you again. And thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoy the conversation. I think there's so many threads. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation. Thank you.
I can tell you I've got twice as many questions ready for you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I love it.
Nice one. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. The show was produced and presented by me, Radim Marnic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes podcast. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creators' fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Marnic, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all.